Track 4, Getting Better.
It's getting better all the time.
This song opens on an F major chord, but a second guitar, and I will assume that it's George Harrison playing that second guitar, is playing a double octave G note. This changes the voicing of that chord to an F add 9 chord. Like that. This is once again just an adaptation. You're trying to combine this with this, so I would play it solo like this. It's getting better all the time. It's these kind of subtle music voicings where one guitar is playing one thing and the other is playing another thing that has added so much color to the Beatles songs, and at times puzzled and perplexed guitarists trying to cover them. In keeping with the theme of Sgt. Pepper and a military marching band, the song is played with a strong military marching beat, albeit a happy and positive one. I have always associated the sound of this staccato, high-pitched opening with a number of things. Radio waves traveling through the air, a human pulse, and an alarm clock going off. I know that radio waves and a human pulse sound nothing like this, of course, and unlike a real alarm clock, the alarm clock on this song is anything but annoying and off-putting. And if the opening of Getting Better is an alarm clock, it is an alarm clock that is waking you, the listener, up to a brand new day of endless possibilities. In interviews, Paul McCartney has stated, in regards to Getting Better, that he likes to write about positive things because it cheers him up, and he knows it will cheer up others as well. Written by both John Lennon and Paul McCartney, Getting Better is a tremendously uplifting song about changing your life for the better, and yet there are some very dark themes being dealt with within the song. In the third and final verse, John and Paul both sing, "I used to be cruel to my woman. I beat her and kept her apart from the things that she loved." In later interviews, John Lennon admits that this verse is about him, that he used to fight men and hit women, and that the violent nature of his past was why he embraced the ideology of peace and love in his later years. Interestingly enough, though, while the song may deal with some dark themes like violence to women, within the song's lyrics, it is a woman who is responsible for the protagonist of the song's conversion from dark to light. Paul McCartney sings, "I've got to admit it's getting better since you've been mine."
It's getting better since you've been mine. Getting so much better.
Throughout the recording process on this track and the rest of the album, the Beatles only had access to 4-track tape machines. Getting Better is one of the more complex arrangements on the album and required 10 unique tracks, including the use of a tambura, an Indian instrument played by George Harrison, at the 1 minute and 36 mark of the song.
I used to be cruel to my...
In the recent Giles Martin 2017 remix, this instrument has really been brought out to the forefront in a very nice way. Squeezing 10 individual tracks onto a 4-track recording machine is not easy. This would be done by recording 4 tracks on one machine, and then mixing and bouncing them down to just 1 track on another machine, and then recording another 4 tracks, and then mixing and bouncing them down to 1 track again, and so on and so forth. Track 5, Fixing a Hole.
I'm fixing a hole where the rain gets in and stops my mind from...
Fixing a Hole is a very simple song about a hole. If you don't fix the hole, the rain will get in. You need to fix the hole so that the rain won't get in. And then you can get back to letting your mind wander. Just kidding. There is certainly more to it than that. The opening chords for Fixing a Hole is F major to C plus to F minor 7th to a B flat 7th, and is performed by George Martin on harpsichord. Played on the harpsichord in 8th notes, the song opens with a very classical music motif. This motif, though, is delightfully betrayed by the closing B-flat 7th chord. Played on the harpsichord, it for the most part fits into the light classical feel of the opening. But played on piano, and the B-flat 7 chord's strong blues/jazz feel is much more noticeable and belies what's to come. Here's the opening to Fixing a Hole on a harpsichord. Here it is played on piano. Now listen to that last chord on piano. Very jazz sounding, very blues sounding. It's a kind of musical misdirection, and if that is too subtle a clue, right after that comes Ringo's brief swing drum fill that also lets you know that this song is about to change direction. Fixing a Hole, like Lucy in the Sky, is another song that was at first considered to be a song about drug use, and in particular heroin use. If you are a heroin user, the way that you fix the hole is with a needle. Paul McCartney has denied this and described the song more as being about renovating your life. In the Steve Turner book, A Hard Day's Right, he describes it as allowing himself the freedom to close off the cracks and holes that allowed the enemies of his imagination to leak in. In other words, a song about doing what needs to be done to keep the negative and debilitating thoughts out and letting the positive and enabling thoughts in. Like Lucy in the Sky, the song's primary chord progression to the verse is a descending chord progression that gives a similar drifting away-like quality like I mentioned in Lucy. This becomes more apparent when I play the chords slower. So first we have the descending chords. I'm fixing a hole where the rain gets in and stops my mind from wandering. And through that you've got this bass where it's just the F to the C, which also adds to that kind of swaying motion even while the chords are descending. When the lyrics get to the "where it will go" part of the lyrics, the chords are swaying back and forth between the F minor 7th and the F minor 6th chord. And this swaying back and forth of the chords does help emphasize a lot of mystery to that line in the lyric. Listening to the song as a kid, that part always filled me with a wonderful sense of mystery that made me wonder where it will go. I would get a huge question mark in my mind about this. Where does your mind wander? It's interesting to notice how well it ties in thematically to the song that preceded it, Getting Better. They both deal with the same basic theme of self-improvement. Getting Better is dealing with it in a very direct and literal way. Fixing a Hole is being much more lucid and dreamlike about it. I also think it's fun to note that the song's opening, while in a classical mode, also carries a bit of that circus carnival feel to it, thus foreshadowing side one's closing track as well. I also want to give another shout out to Paul's rather inventive bass line on the "Where It Will Go" section as well. The bass line walks up to, but never lands on the root note of the chord that it's walking up to. You keep expecting it to land on the F. But instead it does this. It never lands. Track 6, She's Leaving Home. I am almost tempted to skip over this track and say nothing. After all, what can I say about one of the most beautiful 3.5 minutes or so that's ever been written and recorded in popular music. She's Leaving Home is the only song wherein none of the Beatles are playing any of the musical instruments on the track. The song features 4 violins, 2 violas, 2 cellos, double bass, and harp. And then John and Paul providing vocals. I had always figured that George Harrison might be harmonizing with them, but the notes on the hardcover book from the Super Deluxe edition of Sgt. Pepper credits only John and Paul as providing vocals. She's Leaving Home picks up where Eleanor Rigby left off, as this is the second time that orchestral instruments and orchestral instruments only provide the musical accompaniment for a Beatles song. The song is in the key B major and opens with a harp melody. Underneath the melody is an E major chord, voiced in 2 voicings, the first here and the second here. At first glance, it would appear that the melody played over these 2 A major chords are just an E major chord arpeggiated. And this is correct on the first half, but on the second half, we have the notes A, B, C sharp, E, and G sharp. Here's the E major chord arpeggiated. Here's the second half of the melody. If you play that second half as just a chord, here is what it sounds like. Play all of these notes together and they create an A major 9th chord. It sounds surprisingly bright and upbeat for such a sad and somber song. It also sounds like sunrise too. Now play these 2 chords over each other and they don't make any sense at all. Here is the chord played over an E major chord. Played together as chords, they don't really work. But arpeggiated over the E major, it's wonderful. It's well known that the inspiration for the song came from a news story about a teenage runaway that Paul read about. Paul created the verses and showed it to John, who created the chorus, dealing with the parents' point of view. The back and forth of the lyrical point of view between the parents and the young girl create a story where you feel sympathy for both characters in the story. This motif of having more than one character point of view is quite common within the realm of musical theater, but is fairly uncommon and unconventional within the realm of pop and rock music, as most popular songs only voice a singular point of view. I can think of few pop and rock songs, though, that take this approach. Don't You Want Me by the Human League is an example of a multiple POV approach in a popular song. If you have the Super Deluxe edition of Sgt. Pepper, you get 2 wonderful instrumental takes of She's Leaving Home. It's amazing to note just how wonderful just hearing the orchestral instrumental arrangement is, even without the vocals. Track 7, Bean for the Benefit of Mr. Kite.
For the benefit of Mr. Kite, there will be a show tonight on trampoline.
Bean for the Benefit of Mr. Kite stands in sharp contrast to She's Leaving Home. While She's Leaving Home is melancholy, Bean for the Benefit of Mr. Kite is, for me, quite menacing. In interviews, John Lennon has stated that he originally was not all that impressed with the song himself, and that he considered it as just something that he tossed off because the album needed a song. It's well known that his inspiration for the song was from a 19th century circus poster, and that pretty much everything mentioned in the song is from that poster, except that the horse's name wasn't Henry. Once again, this would lead some to interpret the song as being about drug use, stating that Henry the horse was a reference to heroin. It wasn't, of course. But for me, listening to Being for the Benefit of Mr. Kite as a kid, the song took on a very dark and menacing quality. The song is meant to evoke an old-school circus carnival, and it does. But for me, this song transcends its source material and evokes a carnival that is taking place in the pits of hell or in someone's fevered, dreamed nightmare. The song's opening instrumental melody juxtaposition of major and minor chords creates a tension that sets the stage for this dark carnival. The juxtaposition of chords on the opening melody is a B major, an A major seventh, a D minor, to a G. It's interesting to note that D minor is the only minor chord, the only chord that has a dark sound to it. And yet the other chords preceding it just still have this tension to them. We get a little bit of release from that G major at the end, but that's short-lived though. For instance, the second chord played is an A7th chord. By itself, it has a bit of dissonant tension. But the opening note of the melody played over it is a second space A note. Play or sing that note over the chord, and we have some very serious dissonant tension. Now, one of the things that adds to this is that melody. When you get to that A7th chord, the note played above that on the melody is an A note. And that adds a lot more tension right there. That's where the chord hits. And then, like so. And then after that introduction, the chord structure played underneath the verse has this very kind of chiller, thriller, horror theater type of sound to it. I could have envisioned this like on some old anthology TV show that played old horror movies. One of the things that I think always keeps the Beatles songs interesting over repeated listenings is the very subtle levels of variation within repetition. As an example, during the first verse, the structure is bass note, chord, bass note, chord, bass note, chord. Slight little change there, doo-doo, but still bass note to chord. Most other bands would have just repeated that same motif on the second verse, and once again, done the same thing, like so. But in the second verse, Paul McCartney changes up the bass, and he goes, he lands on an A, and that's a variation right there, just the landing on the A, because the first verse lands on a G, second verse lands on an A, little variation right there. But also, when you put that with the chords, instead of bass note, chord, it's go. When the line, "a hogshead of real fire," hit my ears, I imagined this giant, disembodied, blood-red hogshead behind a black night sky with a ring of fire blazing behind it. I realized that this was probably not John Lennon's intent, but to me it all came off as quite horrific and thrilling, like an old-school Hammer horror film set to music. In my review of the session tracks from the Sgt. Pepper Deluxe Edition, I mentioned that the earlier session recording of Being for the Benefit of Mr. Kite comes off a bit more pedestrian and less menacing than the final version does. In spite of all the melodic and lyrical elements that I have mentioned here, what really adds the final touch on this song is John Lennon's final vocal performance and George Martin's production. John Lennon lets out just enough restrained menace in his voice, and George Martin also adds just the right level of studio effect to make him sound like the circus ringmaster of some other dark dimension. Also is the rather bold production decision to cut up various tape clips of different organ and calliope performances, have them thrown up into the air, and then reassemble them at random to create the song's very dark, hallucinogenic ending. This gives a very haunting ending to side one of Sgt. Pepper. You know, if you read a novel and suddenly you reach a cliffhanger ending at the end of the chapter, you are very compelled to turn the page and keep reading to see what happens next. And I feel that back in the days of vinyl, ending side one of your album on a dark and ominous note like this would have had a similar psychological effect on the listener and made them want to flip that vinyl record over and get to side two. I realize, of course, there is no continuation of the story, but I think subliminally it has the same effect on the listener. Hey everybody, this is TJR. I want to thank you so much for watching. Hope you enjoyed part 2. If you want to see the rest of this, and if you want me to do more in-depth analysis like this, then please show your support. Click subscribe if you haven't done this yet. Click like on this video. Leave a comment. Share the video with friends, encourage them to watch, and do this with as many of my videos as you possibly can. I'm looking forward to checking out your comments, and thanks so much for watching. I'm hard at work on part 3 already. Bye.